Welcome to CivilNet. My guest today is Mr.Pound, a UK Member of Parliament for Ealing North. Thank you for joining us at CivilNet.
My pleasure, Maria.
You were able to secure what is called an adjournment debate in the UK House of Commons about the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, and it was entitled Nagorno-Karabakh and Azerbaijan. I watched the video and I read the Hansard transcript of your speech, and I must say that it's very obvious that you are a very good friend of the Armenian people. And you've been a long-time member of the British-Armenian Parliamentary Friendship Group. You've been to Armenia several times. You've been to Nagorno-Karabakh for both business and to attend weddings. And you know, in that time period, our issues here in Armenia haven't really changed in terms of our relationship with Turkey and our relationship with Azerbaijan. As somebody who is very closely who has very closely followed the events in this region, what advice would you give?
Well, the first thing to say, Maria, is it's an absolute tragedy that we are in a sort of frozen period with regard to the negotiations at Minsk. I'd say two things, important things. Firstly, we must never forget that if the negotiations are frozen, the conflict isn't. 20 people died last year. There is still shooting across the line of contact. Every day there are incursions happening. Now, just because not much is happening in Minsk doesn't mean a lot isn't happening in Artsakh. A lot is happening on the border. So we have to never, ever forget that. However, there's a little bit of optimism, I think. The co-chairs of Minsk have met President Sarkisian and President Aliyev. They have actually started some discussions. The American ambassador in Baku, Ambassador Morningstar, has been extremely positive. And I think there may be an element of kind of patience is running out there. But look, at the moment, we are approaching, the reason why I had the debate is because we're approaching the 20th anniversary of the ceasefire in May 1994. And it's when we realize how many thousands of people were killed, how many, the sheer agony and the misery of that conflict, we owe it to those people who died, to their families, to their friends, some people are still displaced. We owe it to them to keep on, to make sure that there can be a negotiated peace settlement. I cannot believe that it is beyond the wit of man and woman to actually achieve this peace, because ultimately the people who are suffering are the people who love Artsakh, who love Nagorno-Karabakh, and I can't believe that's in anybody's interest. But you're right, it does seem as though there's very, very little mobility, and I think one of the problems is, if you look at internal Azerbaijani politics, and I choose my words with care, but there are issues there which are of concern, and sometimes people concentrate on the external to distract from the internal. And I think maybe there's an element of that. But I mean, I've met some good Azeris, and I want to see Azerbaijan and Armenia come together. And I want to see Nagorno-Karabakh be a place of freedom, because it is one of the most beautiful places on earth.
It certainly is.
It's staggering, and it shouldn't be a war zone. It should be heaven on earth.
It certainly is. I agree with you completely. And as you mentioned, it's the 20th anniversary coming up of the ceasefire, self-imposed ceasefire. I mean, both Armenia and Azerbaijan have been maintaining that ceasefire with intermittent OSCE monitoring of the line of contact, which one will be taking place tomorrow, actually.
Indeed. Yeah.
I want to ask you, as a parliamentarian from the United Kingdom, in your speech in Parliament on February 11th, you did mention Britain's, the United Kingdom's business and trade relationship with Azerbaijan, taking into consideration Azerbaijan's vast resources of oil and energy. How does that impact the United Kingdom's relationship with Armenia?
Well, it's very, very difficult, because our trade, our bilateral trade with Armenia is very, very small. When I first started coming to Armenia, I think there were 3 companies trading here. And one of them was because, we had a diaspora
connection.
Indeed. Which is, and what's wrong with that?
Sure, sure.
And, I've been at a place called Pharmatech this afternoon, which is run by a diaspora Armenian Cypriot. And fine, I'm delighted to see it. But look, Britain doesn't have a huge amount of pressure to put on Armenia. And in many ways, it's not Armenia that the pressure should be put on. However, The United Kingdom is about the third biggest trading partner in Azerbaijan. It's about 51% of their exports are channeled through the United Kingdom. British Petroleum is a massive player, right back to the days when Gulbenkian wrote all the rules for it. I can't remember where Gulbenkian came from, but I think it was not far from here. So we actually have a say in that. Now, but the point is why, what is probably behind your question is not just how, but why. Now, the point about the United Kingdom and Armenia is that we have a very, very long-standing, deeply established community here. And our relations, the United Kingdom's relations with Armenia, go right back to the first of the great massacres, and obviously to the genocide, which we're commemorating tragically the 100th anniversary of next year. And the United Kingdom has done extremely well. A great many Armenians, going right back to a famous writer, Michael Arlen. Well, people don't know about Michael Arlen. Everybody should know.
The first book I think my father made me read. Yeah, that's right.
Everybody should know about him. Everybody knows about Gulbenkian. We know about Cher. We know about Charles Aznavour. Sadly, we know about the Kardashians, but that's another matter. Okay, but the point is, joking aside, we have a close link. A very, very... Armenia, it must never, ever be forgotten, in 301 AD, was the first ever Christian nation on earth. 301 AD, that long ago. My country is a Christian country. We feel a fellow feeling for that. So there's a small amount of grant aid we give to Armenia, a small amount we give to Azerbaijan. But
slightly more you give to Azerbaijan.
About 4 times as much, actually.
Yeah,
it's about from 300,000 to about 1 million. But let's use that to try to encourage people towards the negotiating table. Look, we're not one of the co-chairs. The United Kingdom is not one of the co-chairs of Minsk. Therefore, we have to work through the French, the Americans, and the Russians. But I cannot believe that we don't have some pressure on Baku that we can use.
Right. I suspect that you would be able to wield that kind of influence. After all, it is the United Kingdom we are talking about. But in your speech, you also talked about how the South Caucasus could really become a transit zone. It really, straddles Asia and Europe, and how it could become a crossroad for trade, transport, and energy. I would really like your opinion. How do you see that happening when Armenia has been excluded from practically every energy and trade program in the region?
I think there's 2 separate issues there. We were talking about Nagorno-Karabakh and we're talking about Artsakh, and I think that is a different issue to this one. And I think in the long term, we have to accept, the United Kingdom and the co-chairs of Minsk have to accept that just as Nagorno-Karabakh, or Mountainous Karabakh Republic, was a signatory to the ceasefire, in a bilateral relationship with Azerbaijan, they must be part of the solution. Therefore, I think to exclude Mountainous Karabakh Republic from the negotiating is a mistake. But if we can just put that to one side and just look at the South Caucasus generally, strategically and geopolitically, it is absolutely in a crucial place. It is the border of Europe, in effect. It's incredibly important. And so far, Armenia has been a beacon of stability in the South Caucasus, although surrounded by not over-friendly states and with no access trade routes except one by the road through Georgia. So despite that, Armenia has to a large extent prospered. It's certainly maintained safety and decent standards within its own nation. So in the long term, quite clearly there has to be a recognition of energy sharing. And I think one of the reasons, I don't want to go off on a tangent, but one of the reasons why the President talked about the common trade agreement with Russia, I think is entirely because of energy security. And whereas people like myself would like to see Armenia closer to the European Union, we understand the brute realities of life. And quite frankly, you actually need that sort of common area for security. So that's in the short term.
It's about energy security. It's also about the security and viability of Nagorno-Karabakh as well, where perhaps if Europe had provided security guarantees, perhaps. And these are questions that... This is a lot of people in UK just don't understand this. They see that up in Gyumri there is a huge Russian military presence there, which is a peaceful presence. It's not occupying this, they're not standing by to invade or anything. And it's not an old mechanized brigade or a battalion. So this is a very modern part of the Federation Army, and they're working on in fact, drones, unmanned aerial vehicles up there. There are also Russian not border guards, but customs officers on the southern border. But the idea
that there are Russian divisions ready to roar into Artsakh to back up the Nagorno-Karabakh army, I think is nonsense. There is no question of Russian belligerents participating across the border, nor was there during the war, even though there were, at one stage, I think there were like 17 different combatant groups, from Ukrainian mercenaries flying MiGs, to Mujahideen from Afghanistan, to Chechens, and on the Armenian side, a few people, diaspora people coming from Lebanon, all over the place. But the Russians didn't come in. So Russia is the huge issue here that we have to consider. But in terms of energy security, I can understand the concerns, I can understand the fears, but I cannot, as a North European person from the United Kingdom, tell anyone in Armenia what you should or shouldn't do with regard to your own security and your own peace of mind. That is your business, your fears and your concerns. I quoted Andrei Sakharov in my speech in the Commons, where, again, getting back to Nagorno-Karabakh, when I said that to the Azerbaijanis, Nagorno-Karabakh is an ambition. To the Armenians, it is life and death. Similarly, energy security, energy supply, transmission, generation, all those things, to some are an ambition, to some are life and death. And you do have to have them. In the long term, I'm utterly convinced that the boundaries, the physical, geological boundaries or the geographical boundaries won't matter, because it will be the knowledge economy of Armenia that leaps across the border. Everybody in your primary schools is playing chess.
Oh, I know. What
does that say? That says you're using your brains, it's not just your muscles. But in the short term, you've got to keep the lights on.
That's right.
And that's
well, our lights are on. We hope that the lights in the region are also on and continue to remain on, so that we do have equal, balanced negotiations with the participation of Nagorno-Karabakh as a side in the negotiation.
I hope the light of democracy continues to shine.
That's right.
Here too.
Honourable Pound, as we say at the Commonwealth, citizens of the Commonwealth, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your very busy schedule to come and talk with us. It was enlightening, I think, for our audience as well. Very important to know that we do have friends in European circles, influential friends, who do understand the core of the issue and don't only look at it as something written on a piece of paper. So thank you.
My pleasure. We're talking about the anniversary of the genocide. This is, in fact, what we call Armenia, but it was called Eastern Armenia. Western Armenia, Anatolia, that huge area, and forgive me for stating the obvious, but some people just simply don't understand that. The area that was depopulated by what isn't, by any definition, genocide. By any definition of genocide. That vast area is no longer Armenian, but this is Armenia. This is where the Armenians are. This is where they will always be. And please God, they will continue to thrive and prosper here in this higher sun.
Well, from your mouth to God's ears, as they say. So thank you very much.
Yeah, my pleasure.
I'd like to remind our viewers that my guest was the Honourable Stephen Pound, a Member of Parliament of the United Kingdom from Ealing North. Stay with CivilNet.